Now, as many of you all know, the 2020 election wasn't as big of a blue wave as the Democratic Party hoped, and even I expected, for example, more Senate pickups and more House wins for the Democratic Party than what actually came to fruition. Now, Joe Biden did win the presidency of the United States of America, which is great news for Democrats. I mean, Donald Trump has become public enemy number one in the eyes of nearly every single Democrat living in America. But still, there are serious questions that are left to be asked about Democrats in the Senate and Democrats in the House. And with everyone pointing fingers, I think I should actually take a few minutes of my time to dissect why the Democratic Party did so poorly in the 2020 presidential election down ballot. I've gathered the three big reasons why Democrats just really couldn't win down ballot races, couldn't win toss-up Senate races, and couldn't flip key House seats that would have expanded their majority. So, the number three, we'll go from 3 to 1. Number 3, poorly ran campaigns. Now, obviously, every party has their bad campaigns run. Like, for example, Martha McSally in Arizona has cost the Republican Party 2 Senate seats there. 2 Senate seats, which is insane. But the Democrats really this year ran bad campaigns. For example, Sarah Gideon in Maine essentially tied herself to the Democratic Party as a whole, and while yes, Maine is a blue state, that didn't work because Susan Collins ran a better campaign and called herself our senator. She made it look like Chuck Schumer was sending someone, just a liberal transplant from Rhode Island, to try to challenge our senator, and that didn't work very well. So Maine stayed red, stayed with Susan Collins. In Montana, another toss-up Senate race that the Democrats lost badly. Steve Bullock really didn't embrace conservative policies that would have helped him gain more votes, and simply, to me, it looked like he didn't have his heart in it. He didn't want to run for Senate in the first place anyways. In North Carolina, obviously, Cal Cunningham's scandal, where he inappropriately texted a military veteran's wife, obviously, that hurt him a lot. But his campaign just simply didn't do much to address it. I mean, he didn't deny it, but he didn't do much to address it. He didn't compare the scandal to that of Donald Trump's, where he allegedly, or he bragged about grabbing women by their genitals. It's simply, the Democratic Party has not found a way to run campaigns in toss-up states like North Carolina. North Carolina has been a white whale for Democrats for a while, and they haven't been able to win Senate races there in the past. I mean, yes, John Edwards won a Senate race there, and yes, Kay Hagan was a senator from North Carolina for 6 years, but they really haven't been able to win these key races in North Carolina when it mattered. Now, they also were unable to make Senate races in Texas and Alabama competitive, even though they should have been more competitive, seeing as Texas was competitive at the presidential level. In Alabama, Doug Jones was the incumbent running against a somewhat unpopular football coach, and I get that Tuberville should have won anyways, but he had a contested primary, and there were a lot of people who didn't like him and branded him as a neocon. But the Democrats didn't have good messaging. They weren't consistent enough. And, for example, in North Carolina, Cal Cunningham spent a good amount of time attacking Tom Tillis and attacking Donald Trump instead of proposing actual policy. And yes, that's good at riling up the base. I mean, obviously the Democratic base in North Carolina isn't very fond of Donald Trump. But it's still important that we remember that North Carolina isn't a solid blue state. And main issues to voters there are healthcare. And yes, pointing out Tom Tillis' votes on healthcare certainly is a good strategy for Cal Cunningham. But really, what did Cunningham have to say about it? Not much. Another Senate race that the Democrats lost in Montana, Steve Bullock literally ran in the Democratic primary and campaigned on being pro-choice and anti-gun in a red state. He also kind of endorsed court packing and said that he would have voted to pack the courts, and in a red state in a presidential election year, kiss your hopes of winning a Senate race bye-bye. In Maine, like I mentioned earlier, Sarah Gideon didn't make any attempt to reach out to Maine voters. Instead, she just played the Susan Collins voted for Kavanaugh card, and while they got a few voters to switch to her side, wasn't enough to win the state. So, bad messaging, poorly ran campaigns, scandals, simply just Democratic Party wasn't able to win Senate seats because of that. And in the House, the House progressives like Cory Eastman in a Biden plus 7 district couldn't win the election there against Don Bacon because of her stance on Medicare for all, her stance on guns, her stance on the Green New Deal. So the second, number 2 is because of Democratic Party leadership. And while I understand that no one really likes Mitch McConnell, and no one really likes Mitch McConnell for the Republicans, the Democrats have it way worse. Mitch McConnell is one scapegoat for the Republicans, but the Democrats, but the Republican Party can talk about Maxine Waters, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer all they want. It's all they want to talk about. In Montana, Steve Daines repeatedly tied Steve Bullock to Chuck Schumer. And yes, Chuck Schumer isn't as unpopular as Nancy Pelosi, but what do you think the Montanans think of Chuck Schumer? Yeah, most of them don't like him. Now, even Democrats hate Nancy Pelosi. I mean, she's been an establishmentarian figure who has refused to work across party lines many times. No one likes their leadership, but Nancy Pelosi takes the cake. I mean, literally, no one that I know likes Nancy Pelosi except for like one person. I know that's highly anecdotal, but Nancy Pelosi cost the Democrats seats because Republicans would run ads and say, this Democrat will vote with Nancy Pelosi every time. And it works for the most part, unless you're running in a solid blue district. So Nancy Pelosi, what the Democrats should have done while they had the chance after a blue wave in 2018, was not voted Nancy Pelosi to be speaker and chosen someone younger and less well known. That way, it takes away a major Republican talking point. As for Chuck Schumer in the Senate, like I said, he's not nearly as disliked as Nancy Pelosi, but he still isn't very popular. I mean, he's not been super. I mean, first of all, when he's in charge of the Democratic Party, and I know it's only been 4 years, but since he's been in charge of the Democratic Party in the Senate, he hasn't really gotten any chances to control the chamber, yet he's still very disliked. So Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, Democrats should do away with them. Not literally, not primary them, but they should find new party leadership. Like in the Senate, they should find someone younger. Maybe even Kamala Harris might have been a decent Senate majority leader or minority leader for the Democrats before she became the vice presidential nominee. So, yeah. Now, the number one reason why Democrats lost seats in the House and failed to pick up the Senate was, you guessed it, socialism. Being tied to socialism repeatedly over and over. Now, progressive ideas aren't necessarily unpopular. A good amount of Americans actually support them. For example, in Florida, I see that Donald Trump won, and that really does not like socialism. The state of Florida voted overwhelmingly to pass a $15 minimum wage an hour amendment, or not constitutional amendment, proposition. Another state that likes progressive ideas but doesn't like the idea of socialism, or not even state, I'll give you a whole entire region, the Rust Belt. The Rust Belt votes populist in left and right. I mean, Donald Trump won the Rust Belt in 2016, and he branded himself as a populist. Sherrod Brown in Ohio branded himself as a populist, and he had progressive ideas like everyone deserves healthcare. Healthcare is a human right. $15 minimum wage, pro-union. Yet, when you brand yourself as a populist or even as a moderate Democrat isn't very bad. It actually works very well. As I mentioned, like Sherrod Brown is the best example, or Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin is another good example. Even Joe Manchin, who is a conservative Democrat in West Virginia, brands himself as a populist. When you call yourself a socialist, that turns off so many people. Just the word socialism turns off so many people. It turns off the Hispanic vote in Florida, and it turns off the non-college educated white working class vote in Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And there are examples of self-proclaimed socialists losing the 2020 election. Now, obviously, Sherrod Brown and Tammy Baldwin and Joe Manchin were not for re-election this year. They were all up for re-election in 2018. They all won pretty decisively. I mean, Baldwin won by 11 points in a Trump state at the time. But I can give you, like I mentioned earlier, examples of progressives or socialists who lost their House races, or even Senate races. Starting with the Senate, Paula Jean Swearengin in West Virginia lost. Now, obviously, she shouldn't have won the race. She was running against a decently popular Republican in a red state, a super red state, but she couldn't even get 27% of the vote. She got 26.7% of the vote, I believe, and she couldn't crack 30, which is embarrassing, and she should have gotten more votes. Like, Joe Manchin might have lost that race, but he would have gotten like 45% of the vote. But I don't hold her up to Joe Manchin standards. Maybe Richard Ojeda could have cracked 35 at least. So, yeah, those are examples in the Senate. I also want to talk about Cory Eastman. She's cost the Democrats that House seat twice in 2 years. I mean, really, in 2018 in a blue wave, she lost in a district that Biden carried 2 years later by 7%. And then on the same ballot as Biden, she still lost the district to Don Bacon. And even moderate Democrats who are being tied to socialism, like Donna Shalala and Donna Shalala and Debbie Marcos Powell in Florida, both in Hispanic-heavy districts, they're being tied to socialism and they're losing as a result of it. So Democrats have to distance themselves from socialism, but not necessarily progressive ideas. Pro-working class ideas, pro-people ideas, populist ideas are the future of the Democratic Party, not socialism. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you're not already. Like and share. Share it on Twitter. Text it to your friends. I don't know, WhatsApp, whatever. And I'll see you all in the next one. Have a great rest of your day.